So we're going to be continuing in Psalms. We started a few weeks ago taking a look at the book of Psalms and trying to understand Solomon's wisdom or the wisdom that God has passed down. Again, if you would like to be able to get some of these scriptures that we're going to take a look at, you can find the notes or the scriptures in the Bible app. But we're going to be in Proverbs chapter 10 for about 30 seconds. Okay, well, we're going to take a look at Proverbs chapter 10, verse 16. This proverb is pretty simple. And I want to try to take something that is pretty simple, pretty easy, and make it about as complicated as I can for you this morning. And so just bear with me for a minute. Solomon said this: "The wages of the righteous is life, but the earnings of the wicked are sin and death." It's a pretty simple statement, right? Pretty easy, pretty self-explanatory. I should just be able to read that and say, okay, have a good day, right? Enjoy your Sunday. Unfortunately, I feel like that's how we've done it as Christians. Unfortunately, I feel like we have gotten so used to reading things like that we just glance over it, gloss over it, and we don't really stop to understand the impact of the wisdom that Solomon is trying to pass on to us. Because when you actually stop and think about what he is saying in those few words, it's going to raise a whole lot of questions. At least in my mind it does. Because when I read those things, I stop and I think, wait a minute. The wages of the righteous is life. But the earnings of the wicked are sin and death. Those words, wages and earnings, make a question pop up in your mind all of a sudden that goes, wait, hold on. I thought that salvation was a free gift, so why is Solomon, in all of his wisdom, saying that, or at least what it sounds like, is that it's something we earn? And not only that, but when you really, if you're a nerd like I am and you really start analyzing these words and trying to figure out what Solomon is saying, not only is it a question of are we trying to earn something, but what are we trying to earn? Like, what does he mean by life and death? Because when I look out at the world and I take a look at what's going on and the people that I am surrounded by, it seems like it's really the wicked that seem to have a whole lot of long life, and it's always the good people that seem to die early. So what does Solomon mean by life and death? Or not only that, but when we think about that we're earning or that we're not earning, and what are we earning, who's the judge of all of that? Who's to say that I have been righteous enough? When I read that verse, I automatically went to have you guys watched the movie Saving Private Ryan? I know that it's bloody and gory and lots of bad things in it, but when I first saw that, as I was watching the movie, I was thinking, man, this is an awesome movie, because I'm a boy, right? And I was like, yeah, guns, explosions, things, stuff, cool. But as you watch the movie, I was like, yes, this is a great movie, it's entertaining, and I got to the last little bit of the movie. And when I watched I think it's within the last 15 minutes of the movie, it completely ruins the whole thing. Because you're rooting for Tom Hanks the entire movie, right? He's the main character. He's going to save Private Ryan. And he's doing all of these amazing things that soldiers should never be able to do in order to find Private Ryan. And he finally gets there, and he gets shot. And as he's laying there dying, and I know I'm ruining the movie if you haven't seen it, he looks up at Private Ryan, and he says the worst words I had ever heard: earn this. How do you earn a life? Who's to say? Even if it were a true story, who was to say that this Private Ryan, if he goes on and finds a cure for cancer, did enough to earn what these men did for him? How do you judge that? Who do we leave that up to? Is God going to say, well, that you did at least enough that it outweighs the bad stuff, right? That's the whole basis of things like Islam. Do the things on this side of the scale outweigh the things on this side of the scale? It's not whether God, you have had a relationship with God. It's not if you really, truly loved God or honored God. It's, did you try to do enough good things in order to make the scale uneven on the good side? So I had a lot of questions when I read this. And I know it seems like a simple, easy verse. Hey, be a good person. right? I even had a science teacher when I was growing up that I don't know even how we got on the discussion, but we were talking about what it meant to sin or be a follower of Jesus and all that kind of stuff. And he said, well, essentially all we're trying to do is just be good people, right? I don't know, because I don't know what a good person is, in all honesty. What is a good person? The wages of the righteous are life, but the earnings of the wicked are sin and death. Well, today, I guess, maybe you'll get a little bored, but I want to dig into this and try to give you a little bit of explanation and context to this so that you understand what Solomon is meaning by this. What does Solomon actually think of when he says that the earnings or the wages of the righteous are life and the earnings of the wicked are death and sin? To put this into context, you got to go back a few hundred years. If you go back a few hundred years to the book of Deuteronomy, in Deuteronomy chapter 11, Moses has been leading the people. He has brought them out of Egypt. He has been trying to do his best to be God's example for the people and the leader that God called him to be. And he has gone up to the mountain to be with God and get the law from God. And there, you can take a look at this in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. These are all the books that Moses wrote and tried to put everything that God gave him into to words so that the people could have it and understand it. But in Deuteronomy chapter 11, Moses, at the beginning of giving the law to the people, he has this message from God that says, God tells Moses, what I want you to do is I want you to go to this place. Once you have entered the promised land, once you have followed me and gone into the place that I have called you to be, there are going to be two mountains that you know. There is Mount Gerizim and there is Mount Ebal. And when you get into the promised land, what I want you to do is I want you to divide the people. Half of them are going to go onto one mountain and half of them are going to go to the base of the other mountain. And when you are there, the tribes that are on Mount Gerizim, they are going to proclaim the blessings that I'm going to give you. But the people on Mount Ebal, they are going to proclaim the curses, the bad things that happen if you don't follow me. See, Solomon is understanding that the basis of the kingdom that he rules comes out of this history of people following God and receiving a law from Moses. And so, at the beginning of the law, Moses says, God said you need to go into the promised land and then divide amongst yourselves, or I'm going to divide the tribes and we're going to have people shouting praise or shouting blessing over the people. And then the other tribes are going to be on the other mountain and they're going to be shouting curses over everybody else. And then Moses proceeds to give the law throughout the rest of the book of Deuteronomy that God has given him. And then at the end of it, at the end of all those blessings and curses and all that kind of stuff, he again refers to Mount Ebal. He again goes back and says, remember, when you follow these laws that I've just told you, this is what you need to proclaim. So, in chapter 11, Moses sets this up. In verse 26, he says, I am setting before you today a blessing and a curse. The blessing, if you obey the commands of the Lord your God that I am giving you today. The curse, if you disobey the commands of the Lord your God and turn from the way that I have commanded you today by following other gods, which you have not known. When the Lord your God has brought you into the land you are entering to possess, you are to proclaim on Mount Gerizim the blessings and on Mount Ebal the curses. As you know, these mountains are across the Jordan westward toward the setting sun, near the great trees of Moreh, in the territory of the Canaanites living in the Arabah, in the vicinity of Gilgal. You are about to cross the Jordan to enter and take possession of the land the Lord your God is giving you. When you have taken it over and are living there, be sure that you obey all these decrees and laws I am setting before you today. And again, in verse 27, he goes on and he says, he reminds them, this is what you're supposed to do when you get into the land. So, first of all, I want to re-emphasize to you, I don't know if you guys really catch on to this, I don't know if you understand or care, but do you know, do you recognize that this whole thing, from beginning to end, is one continuous story? I know that there's a lot of books. I know that there's a lot of different kinds of writing in there. I know that there's some weird book that's like a love letter between a husband and a wife, and it gets awkward reading it sometimes. I know there's poetry and songs. I know there's books like Job that you read and you go, wait a minute, what in the world is happening? But this whole thing, from beginning to end, when you really sit down and look at it, tells the continuous story of God working through people in order to bring about the salvation that he intends for his creation. What I mean by that is, if you fast forward a few years, Moses has been leading the people, but God tells him he can't enter the promised land because he had disobeyed God. And so Moses and God appoint Joshua to be the leader. And in Joshua chapter 8, after they have been conquering, they haven't conquered the entire promised land, but Joshua is leading the people. He is moving forward, being a conqueror for God, and they've destroyed the city of Ai, however you want to say it. And they have followed God's instructions. They have been conquering, and they get to this spot where these mountains are, where Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal are. And Joshua says, this is the time. God told us that when we reached these mountains, it was time to proclaim the blessings and the curses. And so he divides the people just as he was told to. He divides them into different tribes, and he sets them on different mountains, and he goes over the law. And not only that, can you imagine being somebody who has to stand there? Because Joshua, it says that he started to write down on a stone tablet or chisel out on a stone tablet the entire law that day. You guys think it's boring just sitting here for like 40 minutes listening to me. Listen to Joshua for how many hours as he goes over law after law after law. But Joshua does it. And then they build an altar, and they make sacrifices to God, and they renew their covenant with God. They renew the covenant that they had made with God between these two mountains. And there's a lot of things that I wish I had a lot of time, and I know I only have your attention for a short amount of time, but there's a lot of things that I want to just try to hit right quick. First of all, understanding what covenant relationship is. A lot of us don't really get what covenant is. Most of the time we think about contract, and we think that when we are in a covenant relationship with God, that means we're in a contract with God. But there's a big difference that might not seem big to other people, but there is a big difference between a contract and a covenant. The contract says that there are two equal parties. A contract says that this party needs something and this party needs something, and because they both need what the other have, they can work together, promise to work together to share the things that they need. A covenant is very different. A covenant says this person needs nothing from you, and you, the other party, need everything from them. But this person, this God, is willing to share it with you. And so, in a covenant relationship, these people Joshua is leading into the promised land have come to the place where God has said that they needed to stop, and they are renewing their covenant. They are saying again to God, look, we have done what you have asked. We are following you, and we want to continue to follow you. There's a covenant. God doesn't need anything from us, but we need everything from him. So these people renew their covenant. They renew their relationship. Not a contract where they're saying, hey, God, you need us, and so when we do all these things for you, it's doing something to fulfill a need you have, and so you're getting something out of this, and then we're going to get something out of it. It's much simpler than that. God, we have nothing. You are providing everything. Thank you. And not only that, but there's this covenant relationship going on, right? And I want you to notice something about this. When Moses has made the Israelite people promise this, or when he has told them this is how God wants things to happen, about going to Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim and shouting promises and curses, and then when Joshua follows through with it, when they get there, it's not a It's not a contract in that they had to do this in order to earn the promised land. Do you realize when you read those words, did you notice that it wasn't, hey, these are the laws that you have to follow in order for God to get you into the promised land? God says, when you are there. Mount Gerizim, Mount Ebal, I don't know if you know where they're located, but if you look at a map of ancient Israel, they are smack dab in the middle of the promised land. I mean, they are almost equidistant from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, and from the top of where the tribe of Dan would have been all the way down to the bottom where Benjamin and Judah would have been. I mean, they are almost exactly in the middle. So when God tells them to go to these mountains, he says, I want you to be in the middle of my promise so you can look out over everything that I am giving you. And that's when I want you to know and understand you are in what I have given you. Now you have to live like you're there. Not earn it, not find a way to get in there and make God happy enough that he'll give you a present. He wants you to be in the middle of his gifts. And then know and understand when you have these, it makes you act different. It should change who you are. Not because you are doing anything, but because you understand that God has been so good to you that you have to be grateful, that you have to be changed. You have to do things not to earn what God has given you, but to just say, God, this is amazing. I love what you have done for me. And because of that, I want to do things that honor you and that give you honor and praise and glory because you deserve it for everything you have done for me. These people standing in the middle of God's promise are asked to say blessings and curses. The people saying the blessings are saying God is going to continue not only to give you this land, you already have it, but he's going to make sure that you have rain for your crops. He's going to make sure your crops grow, that Joshua goes through all kinds of things. Moses goes through them too. The rain makes the crops grow and the grass grow, and the grass growing makes your cattle grow and your sheep grow. And God just says, look, if you're willing to live here and understand that this is a gift to you and it changes how you act because you appreciate what you've been given, then God's going to make it grow even more. He's going to take care of your needs. He's going to take care of you as long as you are willing to understand that this is not yours, that you didn't do anything to earn it, but that it was the gift of God. And that should change you. But we can't forget that the other side, the other mountain, it was the mountain of cursing. This picture is actually of Mount Ebal. And when the cursings were proclaimed, it was because the people had failed to appreciate God. Moses in Deuteronomy, when he's telling them that they need to do this, he says this, remember today that your children were not the ones who saw and experienced the discipline of the Lord your God, his majesty, his mighty hand, and his outstretched arm, the signs he performed, and the things that he did in the heart of Egypt, both to Pharaoh and the king of Egypt and to his whole country, what he did to the Egyptian army, to its horses and chariots, how he overwhelmed them with the waters of the Red Sea as they were pursuing you, and how the Lord brought lasting ruin on them. It was not your children who saw that he did that for you in the wilderness. It's not your children that saw all the miracles that God did for you. So, like us, the Israelites, over time, God knew that they would forget. God knew that it would not slip their mind, or that it would slip their minds, that they would get distracted, that they would get focused on other things, and so they would not remember that all that they had was provided by God. He also didn't want them to be forget and turn away to other gods. Later on in chapter 11, verse 16, he says, "Be careful, or you will be enticed to turn away and worship other gods and bow down to them." God looking at these people and knowing that they are people. He created them. But knowing that they can easily lose track, be distracted, forget, be drawn away by things that look good, sound good. And so he says, look, you have to understand that there are consequences for your actions. There are repercussions for the things that you do. And so if you go into, when you are living in the middle of God's promise and you forget that he has provided it for you, when you turn away from him and think that maybe you have done it on your own or that someone else has done it, then it's going to be taken away. And a lot of people don't like to hear that. A lot of people don't want to think that God can be that way. But there is a point in a covenant. Remember, when in a covenant, it's not two equal parties, but it's a greater party and a lesser party. Unfortunately, God knows and recognizes that a lot of times we like to try to shift those and put God as the lesser party and us as the greater party who can dictate things to God. And God says when that happens, there will be curses. There will be losses. There will be death. There will be sin and loss. But there's another thing that I want you to notice about this. If you take a look at Joshua chapter 8, as they're doing all of this, not only in Joshua chapter 8, but this is what Moses had told Joshua to do. When they get there and they're preparing to make the blessings or to do the blessings and the curses and to reaffirm their covenant with God, God tells them to build an altar. But if you read through it, he doesn't say build an altar on the mountain of blessing, where all the good things come from. God says, I want you to build the altar on the mount of cursing. God, knowing that we make mistakes, is already preparing beforehand the way to provide forgiveness for the cursing. That stone right there, if you look at that, that's actually Joshua's altar. They found it on Mount Ebal. That right there is on the mountain of cursing, where God said, even in your worst moments, I'm still going to provide a way to forgive. Even when you are cursed, that is when you need to worship. That is when you need to return. So this altar, fast forward a couple hundred years. Solomon, in all of his wisdom, knows his history, knows where he comes from, and he is wanting to convey to his people something that they need to know and understand. Not that they can earn God's greatness. A lot of times we go back and we look at the law and we don't like the Old Testament, or we don't like the law because we think it was all about earning God's love, earning God's grace. But when we actually look at what it said, God didn't want us to try to earn it. He wanted us to experience his grace and goodness in the middle of his promise. And so it's not that Solomon is trying to say, earn this. It's not that he is trying to say, this is my standard or your standard. It's that this is God's standard that he has already given you, and he wants you to continue it. He wants you to experience it. He wants it to be everlasting. He wants it to be eternal for you. But when we decide to put ourselves above God, when we try to switch the covenant and make ourselves more important, when we stop trying to live by the promise and just experience the good things of the promise, God says, you're going to lose it. Solomon's wisdom says that we should live, or the righteous will get life. That mountain, there's something that surprised me, something that was impressive to me that I don't know if you guys know. So Solomon is thinking about this altar, right? He is thinking about this place where the covenant was renewed, where God said that there was blessings and curses, that when you live the way that God intended, that brings life, and when you don't live the way God intended, it brings death. And he wanted to make sure that his people were reminded of that. He wanted to make sure that his people understood the people that God had entrusted him to take care of and had given him all this wisdom for. He understood the context of this. He understood the basis of this was that God has already been good. And that should have an impact on us and how we live our lives. But that altar, again, like I was saying, has new meaning now. Because from the time that it was built by Joshua, fast forward, not just a couple hundred years, but fast forward 1,400 years. Fast forward 1,400 years, and Jesus is walking from Judea back home to Galilee. And on the way, he gets tired. And so he sits down at a well and sends his disciples on to go find some food. As he's sitting at this well, a Samaritan woman comes. A Samaritan woman comes to draw water in the middle of the day. And we have all heard this story. We all know that there's all kinds of theological and spiritual implications to this, but I want you to understand that Jesus, sitting at this well, meets a woman just outside of a city called Sychar. Sychar and the well of Jacob are at the head of a valley between two mountains. On one, blessings were shouted. On the other, curses. This woman sitting at the head of the valley is in the shadow of blessing and cursing. She is between Mount Gerizim and Ebal. And when she comes to Jesus, and Jesus says to her in verse 10 of chapter 4 of John, Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." She gets all excited, right? She gets excited and says, "Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this well and drank from it himself, or as did his animals and his sons?" And Jesus answers, "Everyone who drinks from this well will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life." A spring welling up to eternal life. Jesus, in this moment, stuck between two mountains that represent the renewing of a covenant, meets a woman who is struggling in life, who is struggling with the decisions she has made. And when Jesus offers her life, when he tries to give her a way to leave behind the pain and the suffering and the hurt that she has had, she says, "Wait, sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty again. Please give me this water, and I don't have to keep coming back to draw water." I thought it was really interesting that Jesus' response to her desire to have what God is offering is, he says, "Go and tell your husband and come back." And this starts the whole conversation about how many husbands she has, and the man that she's living with isn't even her husband. What Jesus is getting at is, look, the way you have been living is the way you decided was right and wrong. You were making the choices about what was good and bad, what was righteous and not righteous. You have been living your life in a way that said, I know God and I accept God, because she had turned to him and said, "We worship on this mountain." And when she said that, she had to have been pointing up at this altar, going, "Look, this is where Jacob was. This is where Joshua was. We worship here." So she at least knows God and understands what goes along with worshiping God, but she had decided that she could do it on her own. She could make better choices than God. She deserved to live her life the way she wanted to. She could decide her own truth. As our culture likes to say, you do you. Right? Oh, it's fine. You do whatever you want to do as long as it doesn't hurt me. And this woman is now hurting and broken and going to the well by herself in the worst part of the day, because she can't be around other people anymore. She can't be around other women anymore because they look at her with shame and disgust because of the life she has lived, because of the choices she has made. And Jesus says, "Look, I have a way out." In this valley between blessing and curse, God says the Messiah is coming. In fact, he's here. And I am offering you a new promise. I am offering you the ability, the chance to come into this new promise and be a part of what God has given you. See, a lot of times we look at Scripture and we think, well, Jesus just loves us where we are, and he doesn't care about the things we say or do. But when you encounter what Jesus says to those people that he has mercy on, that he has forgiveness for, he always picks them up where they're at. Yes, but then he says, now go and sin no more. Live like you've been changed. Don't stay in that same junk you've been in. Live like you have become a part of the new covenant, where God has given you everything, and you just have to live like you actually have it. Like you really, truly are a son of the King, a child of God. Given a choice between the blessing and the curse. God looking forward and knowing that even in our worst, when we choose to forget, when we choose to walk away, when we're distracted by others, just like that altar that Joshua built, Jesus said, I am the new altar. I am the new sacrifice. I'm the one that's going to make it completely, wholly taken care of. Not just for a little while, not just partially. I am the one, Jesus says, I am the one that's going to make your sin gone. Now, why would you want to make it come back? Paul says it different in Romans chapter 6. As soon as I read this, I was thinking, man, Paul's a really big thief. But Paul in chapter 6 of Romans, verse 23, what does he say? It says, the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life. Maybe it won't be a length of days. I guess it's kind of an old saying or a stupid cliche, but God's not looking to necessarily put more days in your life, but more life in your days. We may not have as many days as we would like in this body or in this time or whatever you want to say, but God is going to give us eternity, and he is going to make those days that we have full of hope and grace and joy because of Jesus. Because when we live in his covenant, we've already got the promises. You don't just have to look forward to heaven. You've got heaven now if you want to live it. It's not just a place to escape to. It's a thing that God is willing to give you here and now. It might get a lot better, sure. But if we are willing to live like we actually have God's promises now, imagine how much more we can make this like heaven. We are living in a time between the mountains. We're living a time where all we have to do is choose to live the way God intended us to live. And we have all of the blessing of God. Living in a covenant relationship with God. But again, the hard part about that is recognizing and knowing that because we're in that covenant, I'm not as powerful as God. I'm not as important as God. I don't know what I'm doing, and I have to let him be God. And stop trying to tell him that I know what's right and wrong, and I know what's best, and I can live the life that I want to. And stop trying to dictate terms to God. But let God tell me what it means to really live.